Emma and Lucas were sitting on the couch, engrossed in the television. I didn't know what they were watching, but they seemed utterly absorbed in it. Without thinking, I approached them, the soft hum of music filling the air. I nestled comfortably into their laps, resting my head on Lucas's shoulder. "What are you two watching so intently?" I asked, but I didn't get an immediate response. When I looked at the screen, I realized it was a romantic movie, and at that very moment, the film was reaching its emotional climax. The two characters on screen embraced and shared a passionate kiss. Seeing me watching the screen, both Emma and Lucas felt uncomfortable. Emma smiled shyly and quickly covered my eyes with her hand. "Don't look, Abby. This isn't a movie for kids," she said softly. That I laughed, trying to wriggle free from her grasp. "I'm not a kid anymore, I'm 18, I joked, although secretly, I found the scene quite interesting. I kept trying to peek through Emma's fingers, laughing and teasing her at the same time. In that moment, unconsciously, I shifted my hand to balance myself on Lucas's lap. Whether intentionally or not, my hand brushed against something hard and warm in his pocket. The sensation startled me, and my heart raced. I quickly withdrew my hand, not daring to look at either Emma or Lucas. "I'm sorry," I stammered, then stood up abruptly and rushed to my room, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I sat on my bed, wondering what had just happened. The image of the remote control in Lucas's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush with embarrassment. Was I overthinking it, or was it an accident? I didn't know, but the shame and awkwardness lingered, and I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. The thought of what Emma and Lucas might think of me kept me rooted in place. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the uncomfortable realization that I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed between us. The closeness we shared seemed to have a fragile boundary, one I had never considered before. That night, after hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go downstairs to the living room. I was hungry and knew my family was probably waiting for me to join them for dinner. But the events of the afternoon still weighed on my mind, and I felt a bit embarrassed. I kept wondering if Emma and Lucas were thinking about what had happened, but then I reassured myself, thinking they were probably in the kitchen or somewhere else, not paying attention to me. I tiptoed into the living room, looking around, fearing to catch their gaze, but to my surprise, no one was there. That's strange, I thought, and I stopped in front of the couch where I had sat with them that afternoon. I was still trying to figure out which channel was on the TV when suddenly, from behind me, two faces leaned in, looking in the same direction as I was. "What are you doing, Abby?" Lucas's voice sounded right next to my ear, making me jump. Emma laughed loudly from the other side, adding, "You look like a thief." I let out a small scream of surprise and turned around to see them standing right behind me. Their sudden appearance nearly stopped my heart, and we all jumped at the same time. Emma and Lucas looked at me, then burst into laughter while I could only hold my chest, startled and amused. "Oh my God, you two scared the life out of me," I said, pretending to be angry but unable to contain my laughter. "And you both look like you're up to something suspicious." Emma raised her eyebrows, smiling mischievously, and Lucas patted my head playfully. "Were you planning to eat something?" he asked. I laughed along with them. In that moment, the uncomfortable tension from the afternoon seemed to dissipate. I felt relieved and joined in their laughter, feeling like someone had played a prank on me unexpectedly. "All right, let's go eat," Lucas said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "The whole family is waiting for you." I nodded, smiled, and followed him to the kitchen. The family was already gathered around the dining table, and my parents smiled softly when they saw me enter. I sat down, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the cozy atmosphere. During dinner, the conversation was filled with laughter. My parents talked about work while Emma and Lucas occasionally teased me with lighthearted jokes. I joined in, and the feeling of embarrassment from earlier seemed to have completely disappeared. After finishing dinner, I helped my mom with the dishes before heading to my room to get ready for bed. As I lay in bed, I reflected on the events of the afternoon and the jokes from earlier. Although I still felt a bit embarrassed, I no longer felt anxious. I smiled to myself, reassuring myself that everything would be okay. Emma and Lucas were still the best siblings I could have. With that thought, I fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, however, things were not entirely resolved. My room and Lucas's were separated by a thin wall, so even the smallest sounds, like movies or music, could be heard. I was known for sleeping late, but that morning, I woke up early at 7 a.m. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, or maybe the sunlight through the curtains was blinding me, but after a few minutes of being awake, I realized there was a strange sound coming from the room next door. My room was located between Emma's and Lucas's rooms, and our house had thin walls, so even the slightest noise traveled easily. I was used to hearing them play or talk, but this time, the sound was different. At first, I assumed they were watching an action movie, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that something was off. The sound wasn't like the typical noises from movies. It had a strange rhythm, sometimes long, sometimes short. My heart began to race, and a thought crossed my mind, making my face flush with embarrassment that I didn't want to believe it, but the sound became clearer. It wasn't music or a normal conversation. Although the walls muffled the sound, I could hear rapid, sensual noises mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to tell myself to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that Emma and Lucas were watching something special. A wave of embarrassment washed over me. Why was I awake? Why did I have to hear this? My heart was racing, and I felt like I was on fire. I put my hands over my face, trying to stop the thoughts that kept invading my mind. This is private, I told myself. Everyone has seen things like this, even me, but hearing it from their room made me feel uncomfortable. We had always been close, and I never imagined facing this situation. I didn't want to hear it, but the sound seemed to cling to me, becoming clearer and clearer. I sat up, got out of bed, and opened the door silently. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay still any longer. I walked carefully down the hallway, trying not to make any noise, but when I reached Emma and Lucas's door, the sound became so clear that it felt like the walls had disappeared. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. My heart was pounding, and I felt embarrassed, confused, and uncertain. I had always known that these things happen, but hearing it from Emma and Lucas's room was completely different. I bit my lip, unsure whether to return to my room or stay where I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. The sound only grew louder, drawing me in. Suddenly, the door opened, and I stepped back, startled. Lucas stood in front of me, his eyes wide with surprise, looking like he had been caught doing something he shouldn't have. We stood there, staring at each other for what felt like an eternity. The silence was unbearable. Lucas cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "Abby, what are you doing here?" he asked nervously, avoiding eye contact. His face was red, and I could tell he was as embarrassed as I was. I couldn't look him in the eye either. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely get the words out. "I was just passing by," I stammered, not sounding convincing, but it was all I could think of at the moment. That moment, the sounds inside the room stopped abruptly. Emma emerged from behind Lucas, her face as red as his. They exchanged glances, trying to find the right explanation, but no one said anything. The uncomfortable silence was overwhelming, and I forced a nervous smile, trying to hide my embarrassment. "I was just passing by," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going now." I turned around and quickly walked away, anxious to escape the situation. When I returned to my room, I closed the door quickly and leaned against it, letting out a deep sigh. My heart was still racing, and a strange, embarrassed feeling washed over me. I couldn't stop replaying the awkward scene in my mind. The image of Lucas opening the door and Emma's expression when she emerged lingered in my thoughts. The atmosphere between the three of us was charged with tension, and I couldn't shake that feeling. I wondered what they were thinking of me at that moment. Maybe they felt as uncomfortable as I did, or maybe even more so. What bothered me the most was the fact that I had heard something I shouldn't have. It might have been an unfortunate accident, but it changed the way I saw Emma and Lucas, my closest companions, my siblings, my protectors. That I covered my face with my hands, trying to block out the negative thoughts, but the more I tried to ignore them, the stronger they became. I told myself that this was just an unexpected moment, something no one wanted to happen. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I couldn't help it. I stood up and paced around my room, trying to shake off the uneasiness. It was just an accident, I murmured to myself, as if trying to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I felt that something had to change, something had to make this feel normal again. Just then, I heard a knock at my door. My heart sank. I knew it couldn't be my parents. They usually didn't knock when they needed me. It had to be Emma or Lucas. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves before opening the door. When I did, I found Lucas standing there, still looking nervous, his gaze averted, clearly trying to regain his composure. He scratched his head awkwardly, a timid smile on his lips. "Abby, I'm sorry about what happened earlier. It's not what you think. Emma and I were just watching a movie, and maybe the timing wasn't right." I stood there for a moment, looking at him with hesitant eyes. His face was red, his gaze uncertain, and I could feel the confusion in his voice. Emma approached him, her face showing the same timidity and embarrassment as Lucas. They both tried to find the right words, but the tension was so thick that we couldn't speak. It seemed like we were all waiting for someone to break the silence that I realized that if this awkward moment continued, it would only get worse. So, I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. I smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed but trying to sound casual. "Come on, I didn't mean to make things awkward," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Don't be so tense, I was just passing by, seriously." Emma and Lucas exchanged a glance, communicating silently with their eyes. After a moment, Lucas sighed and smiled slightly. "Are you sure, Abby? You don't feel uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. I immediately reassured them, trying to ease their concerns. "I'm fine, really. In fact, I think I love you both even more," I added quickly, trying to make them laugh. They both looked at me with surprise, and for a moment, there was a silent understanding between us. Then I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I took Lucas's hand and gestured to Emma. "Let's go to my room and talk for a bit, okay? Consider it compensation for the awkwardness," I suggested. They both looked surprised by the suggestion, but after a brief pause, they nodded. It seemed like the only way to break the tension. I smiled and turned around, walking toward my room with both of them following me slowly. When the three of us sat down on my bed, I decided to lighten the mood by making a joke. I looked at Emma and teased, "So, the movie was so good that you both lost track of time?" Emma laughed awkwardly, covering her face with her hands. "Come on, Abby, stop teasing. We just didn't think you'd hear it," she said, her voice serious. "I actually thought you turned up the volume so I could hear it," I said, playfully raising my eyebrows. This made both of them laugh, and for a moment, the tension seemed to disappear. After chatting for a while, I felt my curiosity getting the better of me. I looked at Emma and Lucas, wondering if I should mention the thought that had just crossed my mind. After a brief hesitation, I gathered the courage and asked, "What if we tried doing it like in that movie?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I regretted it immediately. I wasn't sure how they would react, but my curiosity had won out. Emma and Lucas turned to look at me, their eyes wide with surprise at what I had said. "Are you serious?" Emma asked, her voice confused. She seemed unable to believe that I was suggesting something so bold. I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. "I was just curious. It wouldn't be bad to try it, right?" I said, although my voice trailed off, and I couldn't look them in the eye. "Absolutely not," Lucas replied quickly, his tone firm. Both of them looked away from me. However, I didn't give up and gently squeezed their hands, trying to reassure them. "Just try it once. I really want to know how it feels." They remained silent for a while, and I could see the conflict in their eyes. After a moment, Emma sighed and, with a look of helplessness, said, "Okay, but just this once, and we have to keep it a secret. No one can know." The room fell silent, and we all sat there, breathing quietly. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We began cautiously, each movement, each action careful but also filled with a strange energy. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it felt like the world around us had disappeared, and it was just the three of us. When it was all over, the sun had risen high, filling the room with light. We didn't say anything, we just lay there side by side, breathing evenly. The discomfort I had feared had completely disappeared. Instead, I felt a deeper connection between us, as if we had gone through something intense together. We went to the kitchen to prepare lunch, and everything felt strangely natural, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But deep down, I knew that the boundary between us had changed. And instead of regret, I felt a new bond, one that brought us closer than before. Emma looked at me with a soft smile. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, returning the smile. "I'm okay. And I think I love you both even more," I replied. The words made me blush, but they took my hand warmly, their eyes filled with affection. "We love you too," they said, and we continued eating. From that day on, our relationship changed subtly but clearly. The closeness we had shared was now something more, something deeper. There was no awkwardness, and it was as if any invisible distance between us had vanished. Every time our eyes met, I could feel a new understanding, a closeness that had never been there before. But deep down, I knew that what we had done was wrong. We had crossed a line, unknowingly breaking the boundaries set by society and morality. I told myself it was the impulsive curiosity of youth, not trying to justify it, but our emotions and curiosity had led us down this path. I don't regret it, but sometimes I still feel a vague anxiety. We no longer talk about it, as if by unspoken agreement to leave it in the past. The way Emma and Lucas look at me now is different. They are kinder to me, more careful, as if afraid of hurting me. And as for me, every time I look into their eyes, my heart races with excitement and anxiety. Our curiosity led us down an unexpected path, and although our bond is stronger than ever, I know things will never be the same. Looking back, I understand that my impulsive actions have left an indelible mark on our relationship, and I can never undo that. We crossed a line guided only by our emotions and curiosity, and although no one else knows, I can't ignore the consequences. Through my story, I want to tell everyone, don't let fleeting curiosity lead you to make wrong decisions. Stop, think about the consequences before you act. Strong emotions can fade, but their consequences can last forever. Value the relationships you have in life, and don't easily cross boundaries just for the sake of temporary desires. True love and sustainable relationships are based on mutual respect, understanding, and responsibility. That is the most important thing.